upon my shoes. I can't give everything. I can't give everything.
Hello everyone, it is the Afro Avenger here with another album review, and this one's a little overdue, but this album is Blackstar by David Bowie. It was released January 8th of 2016. Some chart information: it peaked at number 1 on the OCC UK albums, number 1 on the US Billboard 200, number 1 on the US Billboard Top Alternative Albums, and number 1 on the US Billboard Top Rock Albums, so a lot of number 1s here. It was released on the labels ISO, RCA, Columbia, and Sony, and its singles were Blackstar, the title track, and Lazarus. So without further ado, let's get this started. This album, Blackstar, was David Bowie's final album before he passed away this year. According to producer Tony Visconti, this album was meant to be a kind of swan song / parting gift to Bowie's fans before he died. What came out of this album was Bowie's very first album to hit number 1 on the Billboard's 200 albums chart, and tons of critical acclaim, as well as an overwhelming commercial performance. This album is perhaps the most David Bowie has ever strayed away from the typical pop formula. Of course, David Bowie was known for his art rock material, but this album actually blends elements of both experimental rock and jazz. It can be heard all throughout this record, and it's actually quite interesting that someone as established as David Bowie would shift gears so late into his career with a whole different sound than what he was mostly known for, which was of course pop, glam rock, art rock, and new wave. Right from the get-go of this album, with the first and title track Blackstar, we're already getting an idea of what exactly this album is going to be like. It opens quite ominously, but quickly transitions into something really spacey and odd. Whether it's the unorthodox drum pattern, the almost folkish chord progressions, David's faint vocals, the sudden shifts in instrumentation, or the saxophone solos strung throughout this track, it makes for quite an opener. The near-demonic bridge section around the middle is almost fitting considering how much satanic imagery and overtones are thrown into this song. However, it changes to a really cool rock section for the rest of the track. It's the lengthiest track on the album at nearly 10 minutes long, but the album itself is only 7 tracks long. Many have suggested that this song, as well as the album as a whole, is meant to symbolize David Bowie attempting to find solace in his imminent death. The whole black star thing could represent David saying that he's a literal dying star. "'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore" is actually a track making reference to the John Ford play of the same name, which chronicles events during World War I. We could classify this track as experimental jazz rock, which is kind of the entire album actually, but this track was quite different from the previous track, in that it's more straight rock than the space rock / jazz rock fusion from before. The track Lazarus was perhaps one of the most telling tracks in regards to Bowie's situation. The music video tells a lot especially, so I definitely recommend you go check that out. It's very dark and contains more of a brooding, alternative rock sensation while still retaining the ever-present jazz influences. Lazarus, of course, was a character in the Bible, a good friend of Jesus who died and was brought back to life by Jesus. David is likening himself to Lazarus in that he has an incurable illness and his death will surely come to pass, singing lines like, "I've got scars that can't be seen," most likely referring to his cancer, which isn't an illness with very visible symptoms, of course. Even during the writing of this track, Tony Visconti realized what the bleak lyrics symbolized and told Bowie, "You canny bastard, you're writing a farewell album." Sue, or In a Season of Crime, again references the John Ford play "'Tis a Pity She's a Whore," with the character of Sue in the song representing the character Annabella in the play. This is easily one of the coolest tracks in the album instrumentally, having a much harder edge than many of the other tracks, mainly due to the up-tempo drumming and the repeating guitar riff. Much of the song is retelling events that happen within the play, with David speaking for the character Giovanni, who is involved in a lustful affair with the already married and blood sister Sue, who again is named Annabella in the play, and what transpires throughout their affair. Very artistic and creative. Girl Loves Me was among the most interesting and actually quite haunting tracks on the entire album, not just because of the barren, voidless instrumentation, but because of what the lyrics say and what transpired soon after this album was released. In the bridge sections of the song, Bowie repeats the lines, "Where the F did Monday go?" which is almost prophetic in that Bowie died on a Sunday and actually didn't get to experience the following day, which was, of course, a Monday, and for many Bowie fans, that Monday was a day of mourning. Mondays are the stereotypical day of tiredness and general sluggishness, but in the wake of David Bowie dying, that stereotypical Monday was shattered, hence the lyric, "Where did Monday go?" Throughout the track, Bowie speaks in two different British slangs used mainly by teenagers and made popular by Anthony Burgess's novel, A Clockwork Orange. One is called Nadsat and the other is called Polar Eye. Apparently, David Bowie was hugely influenced by the likes of Kendrick Lamar and Death Grips on this album, and it actually shows quite a bit, especially on this track. He was impressed by how experimental and out there Death Grips is, and how a mainstream rapper like Kendrick was willing to experiment with the likes of free jazz on an otherwise underground-style album. In the same way, Bowie's experimenting a whole lot more on this album than he has his entire career, playing around with experimental rock, experimental jazz, and alternative rock, marrying the subgenres to create something rather unique. Now, Dollar Days is actually a song directed mainly towards David Bowie's fans and to the whole world. Lines like "Don't believe for just 1 second I'm forgetting you" just really tugs at the heartstrings when you realize this was especially directed at the people who had loved and followed David Bowie's work for decades. They might not have realized it as soon as the album was released, but 2 days later when he died, it makes lyrics like these all the more clear. This was like a letter to his fans as much as the album is in general, really. It has much more of a classic rock feeling, definitely not as experimental as the rest of the album, and for me, this was actually a good change of pace, giving fans something a bit more familiar when addressing them directly. On lines like, "I'm dying to push their backs against the grain and fool them all again and again," is most likely referring to how David wants to keep being himself, the guy who would go all out in terms of style and artistry, who would confuse people to no end with his thoughts and ways of life, who would shock the world time and time again. The final track on the album, I Can't Give Everything Away, opens with a harmonica part, highly reminiscent of the 1977 song A New Career in a New Town, which, interestingly enough, was a song about starting fresh and moving on with life. Being that this is the final track on the album, Bowie's talking about how he knows his time is almost up, but he can't or couldn't tell everybody his secrets, such as the fact that he was dying, and he knew he was dying. The style of the song is very 80s, having much of a new wave vibe that David was quite well known for. Lines like, "I know something is very wrong and seeing more and feeling less," you just know he was alluding to his losing battle with cancer. And it's so sad yet so heartfelt how he decided to tell his audience, and that's the only way he knew how, through his music. Overall, I really have no words to describe how simply incredible this album was. The depth, the heartbreak, the anguish, the darkness, it's all there. This was David Bowie's final album, and he actually spread the news of his own death through his music. Of course, most people probably weren't aware that David was soon going to die. Even, by listening to this album, you could have easily inferred that David created another character, much like his famous Ziggy Stardust character. But no, this album was actually about himself and his struggle to maintain life in the face of impending death. I absolutely love the blending styles. It's experimental, yes, but not so left field to the point that it's inaccessible or difficult to listen to and enjoy. This album, much like the majority of David's discography, was without a doubt an incredible listen. However, it's so bittersweet in that not only is he relaying the news of his impending death, but he died literally 2 days after this album was released to the world, and making a lot of the lyrics and themes hit home much harder. Despite all this, I really did love this album to pieces. I listened to it a good number of times, and really delving into lyrical themes and meanings behind certain phrases, it actually makes me really sad to not have gotten more into David Bowie when he was still alive. And I've tried to get more and more into different artists so that when they die I'm not completely oblivious to their legacy, but it's hard because you never know when these people are going to die, of course. People didn't expect Amy Winehouse to die at the age of 27, but I'm going off track. This album was very sad, but musically and theme-wise, it's a complete work of art. I loved every single track on here, especially the last 3 tracks. I recommend this to literally anyone, not just people who are into things like experimental rock, jazz, alternative rock, or whatever, but to people who are simply into really good music. And David Bowie, I hope you rest in peace. You will not be forgotten, ever. Anyways, that does it for this album review. I thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did enjoy, please hit that like button, also subscribe if you want to see more, and if there's a song or an album that you want to see reviewed on this channel, just leave a comment down below, or check out my Facebook or my Twitter. The links are in the description. But again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. So long.